So what I was saying was, no, network documentation is not solve all your woes when it comes to security. Of course, the things that do that are obviously keeping up to date on patches and various other things having to do with your network, and of course securing all the access points and those types of things, right? That's pretty standard type stuff, and I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff out there I have no idea about or really understand. But from our perspective, or from my perspective, as I'm going out and sort of reading about all these different things that are happening in the world, as far as IT related, I think in terms, of course, network documentation, because that's the type of tool we are. And I think to myself, how do in an environment as large as a network, no matter really what size it is, how do you sort of do two things? One is secure it, right? But two is respond to issues or problems that do come up. And for me, I view it as one aspect is having good documentation about your network, so you can resolve those issues. And there's different reasons you have network documentation. It's of course to understand your network, but is it really solving a problem or an issue that you have? One might be, hey, if I'm securing my network, what are the places where people could get into my network? Do I know where those are? Do I know what those are? Two, if I have a lot of equipment out in the world that I'm responsible for, or that I'm leasing through some network provider, whatever it happens to be, what is that equipment and where is that equipment and so on? Is it up to date and those types of things? Now, I'm not going to tell you if it's up to date or not, and that information, some of that information you can gather via SNMP and so on, but there are other tools that do a lot of that sort of infrastructure, the inside infrastructure, so to speak, what's inside the equipment, how's it connected, and so on. But from the standpoint of the documentation side, where is equipment, how is it connected physically or maybe logically, and giving you that sort of overview of the network, that's kind of where we come into play. So I'm talking about things like giving yourself that sort of security blanket of, this is my network, I feel better about knowing what's out there and how it's connected. What are the different aspects of my network, and what is that sort of overview picture? And that's really what we bring to the table as far as the documentation tool goes. So we have some blogs out there you can read up on some of our thoughts and opinions about some of these different topics. But so in a little bit, I'll show you our tool, kind of what I mean from the standpoint of network documentation and what you can do. And I'll talk a little bit about bringing in the data. How do you sort of do or assemble network documentation, right? The other side of this is, compliance and things like that. I have a lot of customers that come out and say, well, I have certain compliance or standards I have to meet, where they say, hey, I've got to be able to provide some documentation that's up to date. So if somebody comes in and audits us, they know what the network looks like and what they, generally how things are put together. It depends on of course, the compliance, PCI and various other things that are out there. So what you're trying to avoid, of course, with any of these things, when we talk about network documentation, there's things like adding yourself to one of these lists where you find yourself, hey, you're the most recent person being hacked, and you've released data into the world that was obviously important from the standpoint of it told information about people and various other things like your customers, and you're of course trying to keep that from happening, somebody breaking into your network. But that's obviously can be a pretty tall order anymore these days. You can look at this list here. It's a pretty neat site that I came across one day, and it kind of gives you an overview of different data breaches and hacks and things that have happened recently. More close to home for me is, because we're in Maryland, is Baltimore. You may have heard about this or not. Let me close that ad, sorry. Something you can read up on. But this is pretty interesting stuff in that Baltimore got broken into and hacked, and this was ransomware, of course, and so on and so forth. So all these things sort of add up to what is the best way for you to help you protect your network. Certainly the high level network stuff where you're up passwords and multi-factor authentication and so on is very important. But I would add to that, knowing your network and documenting your network, I think it'd be a very important aspect too. So what does that mean from our side of the house? What do we do or allow you to do to help you document your network and give you more information about kind of where you are and what you have? So for us, we're a documentation tool first and foremost. We're a visual documentation tool where you can build a hierarchy of data. The data you collect and capture is really kind of up to you. So our tool called netTerrain, you can do physical drawings, logical, inside plan, outside plan, et cetera. And there's all different ways of bringing in data into our system. Automation ways, the usual drag and drop manual type things and so on. So for our customers, what we sort of bring to the table is the ability to create this documentation in different ways, so you can get to data and information quickly. So one is, of course, knowing what you have and where it is, and so on. How is it physically connected? So for a tool like ours, you can build, again, these sort of hierarchies of information, start to capture data about different aspects of your network. Maybe it's a building and a location. Maybe it's your different locations around the world. Data like who are we contracting to provide bandwidth, connections, private lines, VPNs, and so on. Where is that documented? That goes back to things like response. You have an issue, you have a problem. How can I get to information quickly to resolve this issue? How can I see what that might impact, and so on. And if you have good network documentation, then a lot of those questions can be answered pretty quickly. So drilling down into this, I'm obviously navigating down through a building. I'm getting down to a point where I'm actually seeing something like a data center. I mean, when you talk about network documentation, what you really want to document is where do you have pain? What's gonna be the biggest bang for your data, so to speak, in your network documentation. If you came to me and said, well, I want to document my whole network, I'd say, well, that's probably not a realistic task if you have a large network. What you might want to do is start off with the things that are very critical. Knowing how your infrastructure is set up for core routers, core switches, things like, again, those outside lines and how, who's providing them and so on. You may or may not want to get into a view where you're showing things like cabinets and data centers. You may or may not have a need for that. But in many cases, you at least have a few wiring closets, maybe a few key sort of racks and elevations that you need to see, like in this view, where you want to see how things might be connected together. And that's true of not just data, but it might be also power and power type connections. So for us, we provide the ability to show devices, show where they are physically. Because again, I go back to, if there's a problem, you sort of really need to know where things are, right, located. Now, you may just have a asset management system where you go online and you say, oh, well, here's that thing. And if it can track connections, great. Then maybe this isn't the right solution for you. But if you do want to see, again, more of the hierarchy and really the physical, how are things connected, where are things located, and so on, that's where this can really kind of speak to that. Again, going back to knowing where things are, understanding, maybe points where people can get into your network, where you've got some, obviously firewalls and where you have certain rules set up and so on. You want to know where all those things are. And I'll show logical sort of view of the network in a second and how that relates back into the physical. But if you get into something like a device where you're showing connections, you want to also be able to know, be able to see those physical connections. What's a path, physical path that might be traversed from this point, this port, down the line, and where does that connect to or terminate to? That can help you answer questions of, hey, if this device goes down, what's the impact? If something happens to this device, what's the impact? If I have to turn this off, what's going to be the impact? So it's going to help you sort of understand that, those views in the network and the information that you have. So here, this is showing a port for the device I just came from, which is in the rack. This is showing physical hierarchy of the actual port versus the physical path. There's a link, there's a connection to a patch panel from this port to this patch panel port, and so on. It just shows you that physical path down the line. This gets generated automatically from the data that gets put into the system, basically. So you can then go in and go, okay, here's my physical network now, and now I understand better about how it's connected and so on. So, and that's giving you data. If you have power connections, you want to show those. You can certainly show how you connect into a PDU, and PDU gets a feed from a primary data source if it's on separate circuit breakers and things like that. So you're starting to get into the documentation side, obviously, here. So let me go back to where I was. So again, getting back to sort of security response being, hey, if somebody's asking me a question about the network, or if there's a problem or an issue in the network, how can I go investigate that and resolve the issue as fast as I can? And this is just one way of doing that, or giving you the tools to kind of do that, right? So the other side of this is building physical documentation is great. Sometimes all you really want is more of a logical. I really just care about a logical overview of my network, or of some, like I said, something like core backbone or some other implementation where you really want to see how things are connected. Maybe you don't necessarily need or care about the true physical port-to-port connections, but what you do care about is give me an overview drawing or document of how these things are connected together or linked together. And you can take the physical, where you do show things in racks and hierarchies, and put them into the logical as well, and have a relationship between those. And what I mean by that is, if you have a device and this device actually lives somewhere, I can look at it in a logical drawing. I can also basically double click on it and it'll take me to its physical location. We call this basically aliasing objects out. So I can go back to this device and see the backplane, and this is where it lives. It lives in this rack in Baltimore. It's actually the device we were just looking at. But I can take that device and put it in multiple logical drawings. It's all the same device. They're always equal to each other, so the data that you see for the device is always up to date and always in sync between logical and the physical. So that's always available between those. And so depending on the documentation that you're trying to create, you have different options, and certainly in our tool, whether it's just logical or physical or both, where they're tied together. Again, you can get into, of course, things like outside plant too, where you're trying to show fiber and strands and ducts and conduit, but that's sort of a separate conversation here. So when you do have all this data assembled, one of the things you can certainly take advantage of is doing things like a search or doing reports. So we have the ability to go in and do a search really one diagram, all diagrams. I want to search for a partial IP address, DNS name, etc. It'll give you results, and then you can go basically to that object. So that's a big deal for people. That's something I talk with a lot of our customers about, and they say, yeah, it's a big part of what they do is being able to get to information quickly, and you do that basically with a search. You might also do that with a report. There's different types of reports. Once you have data in our system, then you have the ability to go in and create or look at reports and how the data's in different views or report types and so on. We have kind of two types of reports. We have sort of the dashboard / management type reports, which are like what you see here, where it's more like pie charts and things like that. You can also get into more of a CSV type report, where, let me allow this pop up here. I'm trying to generate this other report here, which is a table report. So you have different ways of getting data out of the system. So it might be again a pie chart. It might be more, hey, I just want to see a list of all my assets or all my patch panels, as the list here shows. So it gives you that type of information. And those reports are things you can generate. You can, the data's there, so you can kind of take advantage of that. Now with this, where you're trying to create documentation, The big question is always, how do I create documentation? How do I get started? What's the best approach, and how much time is it going to take? Well, it all comes down to, again, um, creating documentation that makes sense. Not, I'm going to document the whole network. No, you document the things that, again, give you the most impact for problems or issues you might be having. If you're not having any issues, then you may not need any documentation. But certainly, it gives you the ability to, again, see your network and kind of view information a certain way. So, bringing in data into our system, we give you different options for that. You can do things like Excel import. Of course, you can manually create things. We can also tie into external data sources. We can do SNMP discovery, so you can get into layer 2 and layer 3 links. You can discover your devices that are out there that are SNMP enabled. We also have what are called connectors to data sources, things like SolarWinds, VMware. The big thing now, of course, is cloud-based systems, right? You've got Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. We've got tons of virtual machines out there with different connections and so on. So we give you connectors to bring data from those systems if needed to help you understand your kind of network. So anyway, with that said, I want to see if there's any questions. And of course, if there's not any questions now, you are, of course, welcome to email us later or give us a call. I hope this was kind of helpful, giving you an overview of our perspective of network documentation, of course, how it might relate to security of your network, and hopefully give you some other thoughts or options for when you are out there securing your network, other things you might want to take into consideration, of course. So I'll give it a minute just to see if there's any questions out there. I don't see anything yet. So that's fine. If anything comes up, just let us know. Again, you can give us a call, graphicalnetworks.com. Just go to our website and find that phone number, or sales@graphicalnetworks.com. We can talk to you about what you might be looking to do. So thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it, and talk to you later.